This is an exclusive presentation from Federated Media. Unholstered.
Homicidal empathy. Boy, oh boy, can't wait to get into this topic here on Unholstered. Hopefully you're having a fantastic weekend. My name is Kayla Blakesley, and I'm just one of your hosts.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Rosales-Scatina. I am a captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department. I am your other coast.
Your other coast.
Your other host.
The other host here on Unholstered. Obviously, Sophia represents the law enforcement side of things. I represent the local media side of things because I host a local news talk radio program here in Northeast Indiana by week. And on the weekends, they let me host this show with Sophia. And if this is your first time tuning in, shame on you. But this show really is all about sharing and telling the stories that don't often get told when it comes to law enforcement. And not just here in our neck of the woods, but really all across the country. And boy, oh boy, Sophia, today's topic might be one of my most anticipated topics of conversation we've ever had. Homicidal empathy. Yeah. You sent me an article as it pertains to this topic of conversation that just blew my mind. I can't wait to get into it. But before we do that, I need you to do something for everyone.
Oh, okay.
What is homicidal empathy?
Well, it's actually new to me, too. I came across it in this article, and as I do a lot of times, I just read a lot of what's trending across the nation. And that's just what the show's about, right? We set the record straight. We look at what's happening on both coasts because we know that what happens on both coasts usually makes its way inward at some point. And this really caught my attention because it talks about when officers go to trial and the jury has what they call homicidal empathy. So they feel empathy for the homicidal subject and really create this whole hindsight 2020 view.
Oh, must be nice.
Yeah, because they have all that information, but the officer didn't have it at the time. So now they formulated, well, the officer should have done this because we know. They know having that hindsight is just, it's great, but we don't have it at the time the incident occurs. So when you're using it to formulate your decision on whether or not what I did was justified, that's wrong. I mean, and the Supreme Court has said it's wrong. We don't have the luxury of hindsight 2020, and it should never be part of the deliberation and final decision.
But yet it is, Sophia. We see this all the time.
Yeah, and especially in these other areas that are probably a lot more progressive than we are here, that made these fundamental changes to their police. And let me just start out by saying, nobody believes that police stuff shouldn't be reformed, but not all of it. There's some things that probably certainly could, and every jurisdiction is different. That's what people forget. What we do here in Indiana is not what they do in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. We do things differently because we have different community standards here.
That's where your mind went, Sheboygan, Wisconsin?
I know, right? I just like that. I just like that name. But so when we talk about homicidal empathy, this really caught my eye because, this is technically a threat to policing in general. And it really got me thinking about what we do in our community to kind of inform our community leaders is our procedural justice program, which is something you went through.
Yeah, I've taken that program. Yeah.
So it really kind of harked me back to that and how important it is for communities to put everyday citizens in these shoot, don't shoot situations, not to sway them, to get them on my side, but just to bring awareness to how quickly things progress. And when you don't have all the information, what does that look like? Because we can all say, well, I didn't know. But no, what does that feel like? What does it smell like? What does it look like? You can, all these senses, all your senses, your hackles on the back of your neck standing up, all of those things go into play here when we're talking about policing. And what I don't want is, I don't want people to expect superhuman abilities from human beings.
But they do, unfortunately.
Yes, they do.
It's unfair. One thing that I think that I would think all sides could agree on is at the end of the day, we all want honest policing.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
We all want accountability, honest accountability for police officers. I think you would agree with that. I can agree with that, right?
Right.
But we don't want this. I don't know how more blunt to put it. And this is not the same, but kind of. I get this whole hindsight 2020 thing and being held to this standard of superhuman, right? In my day job, it happens to me every day, almost every hour. I'm like, man, I should have asked that. when I'm interviewing someone. Man, I should have said this. That happens to me constantly, and my job is not life or death. And I wished I could always go back and do something differently almost every day when it comes to content that comes out of my mouth. To me, that's a hazard of thinking out loud, because that's essentially what I do for 4 hours during my news talk program.
Yeah, and a lot of this is, they're really looking for officers to expressly de-escalate every situation, and when the de-escalation fails, they're actually blaming the officers because then the suspect becomes homicidal, and then the officers react to that threat, shooting and killing the suspect or shooting and wounding the suspect, and now the officers brought up on charges because they couldn't de-escalate. But let me tell you, not everything can be de-escalated. And they give us tools to do that. That's why we have batons. That's why we have pepper spray. That's why we have tasers. Those are de-escalation tools that we can use before we go to lethal force. So,
but again, what happens then? You go through all these de-escalation tools. You're tiptoeing around I'm going to call it in this case, suspect, who's standing there with a knife or a firearm or what have you. Then what? Are you supposed to just get shot, Sophia?
Well, according to some of these quotes from the jury in this case in Colorado, the answer would be yes. I'm supposed to get stabbed. I'm supposed to get slashed. I'm supposed to take the injury because I'm assuming they think because that's what we're supposed to do.
Or death, apparently.
Yes,
I mean, how do you know? Can you read some of what these jurors were saying in this Colorado case? Because this is what really, it blew my mind. It angered me.
It's eye-opening. And I just, in this day and age, I don't understand how people can simply see this and say these kinds of things. But this is what they're saying. So let me just kind of preface this with the case at hand. So basically, this was a drunk driver who refused to get out of the car. The officer spent an hour and a half trying to talk this person out of the car. When they refused to get out of the car, a supervisor says, we need to get him out of the car. So they broke the window, unlocked the door, and as they were opening the door, he got a knife and he came at the officers. Now, several of the officers on the scene said that he tried to exit the vehicle with the knife. And doing so, they beanbagged him, tased him.
For people who don't know what beanbagging is, can you explain that really quick as a de-escalation
small,
tool?
They're shotgun shells, but instead of filled with beads or whatever, the buckshot or slugs, they're filled with beanbag rounds. So they are painful.
They hurt, yeah.
Yes, and your aim is to certain areas of the body that would create a kinesthetic effect, and therefore sometimes you end up dropping the knife depending on where they're hitting you or something like that, or you bend over in pain, and that gives us a moment to then swoop in and grab you. So they did all those things. Like I said, they spent an hour and a half trying to talk him out. Did they use the taser too? Well. They did try to use the taser. Now, according to the taser expert, it did not connect. There was no connection of the taser, so it failed.
Which is also common.
Which is common. About 50% of the time, tasers do fail. So they did all these things. He still kept coming at him with a knife, so they shot and I believe they killed him. So the supervisor was on trial for making the call of going in to get him, and as well as the officer who actually shot him. So they were on trial because the prosecutor there felt it was his duty to put them on trial because they should have predictably known.
The prosecutor said that.
Yeah, the officer, the supervisor who told them to go in and get him should have predictably known that what he did was going to cause his death.
What a joke.
But we didn't know he had a knife. I mean, they didn't know he had a knife. He never displayed it any other time. So then fast forward, all these things happen. The officer ends up having to shoot him. So some of the things the jury said at the end were they should have been nicer.
I'm sorry. The officer should have been nicer.
Should have been nicer.
Okay.
They should have tried to disarm him with the taser before the beanbag. And if the taser failed, they could have borrowed one from another officer to tase him again. Okay. Yeah, the officer might have been caught, but not necessarily stabbed or get seriously bodily injury. We spent a lot of time discussing whether the knife was really that dangerous since the officer had a vest on. And the officer should have just stopped and backed away. They could have sat in their cars and just watched him.
No, people aren't that stupid, are they? Because I'm just going to say, I'm looking at you. You're sitting here in your vest right now. And Sophia, you've got plenty of exposed arteries.
And not to mention the vest does not stop sharp objects at all. So, I mean, I'm just as exposed as anybody else. But the one that got me the most was from the jury foreman, who said, if I'm in that officer's position just as a regular human being, not as an officer, and I have the choice to shoot and kill the suspect versus the risk of maybe the officer getting slashed by a knife, every day I'm choosing for the officer to get slashed by that knife. And as we were talking a little bit ago, I'm like, okay, take the officer, take me out of it. Put your daughter in that spot.
Put your mom there.
Put your mom there, your wife,
Your best friend.
your son. Now what do you say? Is that still what you're going to say? I'm going to choose my daughter to get stabbed or slashed.
And so by the drunken fool who has a knife.
Right. And we don't know that it's going to be a slash. It could be a stab, and the one stab could be fatal to anyone.
Or it could be a gun. It could be some other form of weapon. I mean, we're just using a knife in this scenario.
Aren't dangerous.
Oh, gotcha.
I think that's the differentiation, because they think a knife, well, you're just going to get cut. You don't know that.
Isn't it true that you're more apt to bleed out from a knife wound than you are a bullet wound?
Knives are really kind of crazy. Now, mind you, I've never seen someone just get stabbed once by someone engaged in a knife fight. They may get cut once while they're disarming someone, but if someone's intent on stabbing you, man, that action comes very fast. And the rule used to be 21 feet for us. They have lowered that down. I believe it's 16 feet now. That's the time you have by the time you see the knife, someone coming at you, the time to react. That gap is, and 16 feet is not very big.
No, it's not.
And
I didn't think 21. I knew the 21. I didn't know it changed, and I didn't think that was a lot.
They lowered it because officers were getting killed and stabbed because that was just not short enough distance. So distance is our friend. The more distance we can put between us and someone with a deadly weapon, the better. But there's sometimes when we can't do that, and we have, what you're supposed to just sit there and let him sit there all night long without doing anything.
Here's what I don't understand, Sophia. Where did this come from? Where did this all of a sudden we're having this expectation of you having hindsight in the middle of, I don't know, what I'm going to call a really high intense situation, potentially life or death? How did all of a sudden we evolve into a society that now expects you to have this hindsight in the middle of this life or death moment?
I think this has come out of all of those police reforms when civilians, without any training or any education on what the challenges, the threats, the distance, or how quickly things escalate. I think that's what happens when those kinds of persons are placed on these civilian boards or these police reform boards, where their object is not to actually make it safe for everyone. What I believe their objective is to be on the side of a criminal and get rid of police.
Yeah.
To me, that's what it is. If you're going to have a civilian review board, that's up to your jurisdiction.
Do we have one?
We do not. But I believe that they should have to mandatory go through police training at an extensive rate just to understand all of the different nuances that we've trained to, that we train every time we go to in-service. We have hours that we're in the range doing different things, shoot, don't shoot scenarios. We have room clearings. We have all sorts of things that we do all the time. And you went through it too with procedural justice. But I want to encourage folks, if you're actually looking to see what this looks like. We actually did this back when we had civil unrest. There was a whole hashtag thing that came out that said 8 can't wait. So it was 8 things that they wanted police departments to adopt, 8 principles they wanted police departments to adopt to ensure the safety of the community. Well, many of these things were already in practice by us. I think we had to kind of minorly change 2 things, but the things that they were asking for, we were already doing in our policies.
Who was they? Who was asking?
The community.
Okay, gotcha.
The whole movement, the BLM movement,
gotcha.
all the progressive, stuff that was coming through. But these were already things we had in practice. Again, not every community is the same. Not every police department is the same. People have different policies, but our policies were pretty much in line with what they had already said. So they were clamoring for these changes. I'm like, okay, we already have these. So we put those out. But what we did is we went one step further, and at the end of this 8 can't wait, we put a link, and we put it back to, because one of the biggest things they had was you have to exhaust everything, all of your tools on your belt before you resort to deadly force. Well, that's not always feasible. So there's sometimes, I am not going to pepper spray someone who's pointing a gun at me.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. But according to these people and what they wanted pepper spray. They want it in line. So they want pepper spray, baton, taser, beanbag, then gun. So you have to do all that or you could be held criminally liable. That's basically their thought process. So what we did was when we had a procedural justice, we went through and we put a citizen in that position. We're like, hey, we're not even going to use a gun. We're going to use a baseball bat. And we're going to simulate. We had this dummy in the mat room, and we had one of our trainers. He had a bat. And we instructed the person going through, okay, you have to exhaust all this. You have to pick up your can of spray and you have to spray him. Mm-hmm. Then you have to pick up, your baton and fake like you're hitting him. And then you have to pick up the taser and tase him. And then you can go to your handgun and see how many strikes you get, because the dummy simulated the officer, how many times he's striking you before
you get through all
to
your
the gun.
Tools on your belt.
Tools on my belt before I can resort to deadly force. Because what he's coming at me with is deadly force. Mm-hmm. One blow to my head could kill me. Right. So we just simulated this, and it was eye-opening to everyone in the room. So everyone that went through, and the lady was gracious that went through everything, but at the end, off the thing, she's like, I didn't realize that was the hardest thing, because I couldn't stop it, and you can't.
Right.
I mean, and he was able to get off 15, 16 strikes with a baseball bat hard to the dummy simulating the officer. And that's even presuming you could, after the first strike, even
and that's
move.
not even, not that that's not realistic, but that's still not even really that realistic.
Right.
Let's be honest.
But it puts in perspective for people how quickly.
Yeah, but I find it sad that you have to do that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you have way more important other things to be doing, but instead you got to deal with, I'm just going to call it this BS, because that's really what I think it is. I did go through the procedural justice course here on behalf of the Fort Wayne Police Department, which thank you for allowing me to take it. But it was eye-opening, and I said it after the course. I think I said it here on the show, and I'm going to say it again. Everyone should be required to take this course. If you want to chirp, that is, about any kind of police reform or defund the police, or if you want to sit on a board, whatever. If you want to have anything or any say to do with policing, I think you have to take this course.
I think it's important to understand where we're coming from.
It is. You put us in real life situations, more real life than that. I went through it.
Shoot, don't shoot.
Yes, I went through that, and I would have been murdered every time. Every time I never even got a shot off.
And you know what I find funny, because we do a lot of these classes with young people too. So we have, we work with the Fort Wayne Community Schools at times to bring in some of their young athletes to just kind of, number one, kind of familiarize them with policing in general, but then let them see them, because they're the future. They're the ones that clamor the most, right, about police brutality, things like that. So we bring them in and we have them go through this program. And what I really find, I guess, kind of weird on some level, but I understand it because it's nervousness. But you take these young people and you put them through these situations, and they end up shooting people that had a cell phone, and they end up shooting people that didn't have anything on them, or just making furtive movements, right? And they shoot them, and everyone, they're kind of like, oh, and then they start laughing. Mm-hmm. I'm like, but you wouldn't laugh if that was me shooting life. Someone.
Exactly.
It's not funny,
right?
But I know why they do it. It's nervous laughter, and I get that. But at the same time, we do. So at the beginning, they have this thing on their phone, and I forget what it's called, but it's just something you can do, like a rating, like tell me the word, describe this training. And so, describe or give me a word that describes your thoughts of police. And at the beginning, it's afraid or fearful or abusive or something like that. But at the end, they change. The words change. Understanding, fast-paced. Unpredictable. The words change. And when I always tell them at the end of this program, I'm like, I don't need you to be on my side 100% of the time. I don't need you to cheer for me or say, hey, or to defend me or whatever. I don't need you to do that. What I need you to do is hold space until the information is all released. Yeah. That's what I need.
Sophia, that's been my biggest lesson I have learned from you. With doing this show for the past couple of years. How many times have I come in here, you and I, off mic, and I come like guns blazing, no pun intended here, ready to go after, in some case, security officers, police officers, and how they've handled a situation, all because I saw security footage, so I know best, And then you're like, hold on, Kayla, and you walk me through security footage, what we know, what we still don't know, what we're going to learn, and then I'm like, oh, wow. I better
It's just
back that up.
perspective.
It is.
It's
It is perspective. But
Yeah.
you said it that during that procedural justice class, that was one of the most profound moments for me. It wasn't even the situation that I was put in where I never got a shot off, but was the situation of this young boy. There's 2 cars. He got to be the police officer. We were given, what were they, plastic Glocks with dummy bullets or something?
Yeah, with like little ammunition rounds. Yeah.
And gave him one of those and said, feel free to fire it if you feel that you need to use deadly force. And an officer was playing, the perpetrator or the suspect or whatever. And they did multiple scenarios with this kid. And every time, I say kid, he was probably 16 or 17. I don't know.
That's still a kid.
Still a kid. And the first time the officer did come out with a gun and there was an exchange of gunfire, right? The next time the officer came out holding a cell phone and the kid still shot him and, what have you. But it was just a really profound moment for me that you don't know. You don't know what anyone, whether it's a knife, a hairbrush, a cell phone, because as much as I realize people should show their hands that they don't have anything. Hey, I'm not armed, or hey, I have a firearm in the car, whatever. We can say people are supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But we know they don't,
right?
Unfortunately. But that was really profound to me. And you're right. The whole kind of group sort of laughed at that outcome. And it's really not funny at all.
Yeah. And it's a safe place to do that because nothing happened.
Right.
But now think of the officer being in that position.
You can't tell if it's a hairbrush, a cell phone,
and I just shot
or a handgun.
someone, and I go up there, and it's a cell phone or it's a hairbrush.
Yeah,
I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm going to prison.
There was something in this article that I wanted to also read and point out by the author, because I think this also goes to my question that I asked you of how did we get here as a society where we have this expectation of hindsight, right? Mm-hmm. In this article, it says, in too many places, the rules have changed. Prosecutors, juries, and activists have been emboldened to ignore the reasonable officer standard, ignore expert police testimony, and simply use hindsight to imagine better or more effective tactics. Of course, with hindsight, the outcome of every decision is known, allowing bias to create a level of predictability and certainty that did not exist for the involved officers. I could not agree with that more, and I can't get over the word imagine. To imagine more effective tactics.
I like to imagine a world where we could all just effectively de-escalate every situation that we were ever involved in. Mm-hmm. I'd love to imagine a world like that. I'd love to live in a world
# world peace.
Yes, and that didn't have crime, that didn't have violence, that didn't have, all these things. But it's not the world we live in, and people don't listen to authority. You see the videos time and time again. You can just scroll through and watch YouTube videos of police interactions with people on body cams, and you can see how people just defy us at every turn. Mm-hmm. They have no respect for anyone, even themselves. And now you're asking me to de-escalate them into doing what I want? I mean, I'm not freaking superhuman.
Yeah.
Nor am I omniscient to know what they're going to do next.
Right.
I can only go with what my training and what my reasonableness as an officer of 30 years has shown me about what potentially could happen.
But I think that a part of that is that lack of consequences. I think a lot of people know they're going to be able to get off because in today's day and age, you can just hate on police. You can cancel, you can reform, you can call for defunding, and you win.
Yeah.
In today's day and age.
Yeah, and a lot of jurisdictions allow just this revolving door of just that, violations to our criminal law. Mm-hmm. And there's no bond, there's no responsibility. They can be arrested 5, 6, 7, 8 times for the same offense. There's nothing. Thankfully, in our jurisdiction here, that isn't the way it goes.
I know, I say that all the time. We are so lucky, so darn lucky here in Fort Wayne.
But we also train our prosecutors. So when we get new prosecutors, we get them through this procedural justice. We get them through all this. And not only that, this article was written from a thing called Force Science. So basically, it's an institute, and they study force, officers, shootings, stabbings. This is where all that stuff comes from. They actually do studies on all of this stuff, and how quickly reaction times are. And they don't use, and just so you know, they don't use veteran officers. They usually use new recruits because new recruits are so like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, that they're going to toe the line where like someone like me, by like, I'm going to cheat a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll have my hand on my gun where, or I'll slyly do it.
The loopholes. Yeah.
Yes. But the new recruit's not going to do that. They're going to listen to the rules. They're going to follow them exactly as stated. So they use new recruits in this. So they do those studies. There was a big thing coming out where you shot someone in the back and they were just running away. I'm like, no, they turned to fire at the officer, and I can prove that, and I'm going to show you how. And they do the physics of the whole thing.
That's so cool.
And it's a remarkable training. If you're lucky, you can get to it as a law enforcement officer, as a commander of law enforcement. I'm waiting on a class. I'm hoping to go.
Oh, cool.
Because this is just something that I think is important in terms when you go out and message too, when you know there's science and you can prove the data shows what you're saying, and this, I'm not making this up, this is truly what it says. That's how we got that 21 foot reduced to 16 feet, because we showed through studies that that's just not enough time. So it's one of those things where it's just always evolving, because new things are coming up, and studies are coming out, and people are really studying policing because it's an important part of our American culture here. And to keep it going in a legitimate and a responsible way, they have to continue to study these things. So I'm glad someone does.
Yeah, you and me both. Really quick, because we're way up against the clock here. Can your average citizen take that procedural justice class that we're talking about here?
It depends. Sometimes that's a yes. Most of the time, we do like to get all of our politicians, community leaders, people who are making those laws, who are making those determinations, who can go out then and take this message out for us. That's basically the premise.
Okay.
And the message is just hold space to all the information, because you don't know what that's like.
Right.
But right now, we just primarily focus on legislators, politicians, and community leaders, and people with nonprofits, those kinds of things, in those leadership positions that can then go back out and message for us.
Well, if you're listening, though, and you're really, really interested, hit us up, because, I know Sophia, so she can maybe hook you up if you want to take the procedural justice course. We've done a whole episode on that in the past. If you want to check it out, you can go download it, where you can find the Unholstered podcast. I mean, you can find it anywhere you download a podcast. Your town, your team, your topics. This is Unholstered.
Thanks for listening to Unholstered. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Unholstered.
Podcasts by Federated Media.